Dear listeners, welcome. Today we're going to delve into a story about pride, power, and secrets that time couldn't erase. In the corridors of New York City in the 1980s, we meet Augustus Montgomery, the feared railroad baron, a man who built empires on steel and silence. 10 years after his break with Caroline Davies, the woman who dared to defy him, an unexpected letter arrives to change everything. They reunite at a farm filled with memories, where ghosts of the past return with force. But what seemed like just a settling of accounts transforms into a devastating revelation. Caroline didn't leave alone. There's a scene, the revelation of their hidden son, Lucas, waits in the farm's library, that leaves the heart suspended and completely redefines the destiny of both. And you? Do you believe that time can heal such deep wounds? Or do certain secrets forever change the tracks of life? Thank you to everyone who comments, shares, and helps this space grow. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the drama. And now tell me, are you listening from your couch, in traffic, or with a cup of coffee nearby? Take a deep breath. Our story begins now, in the center of New York City's economic power in the 1980s, where deals were sealed with firm handshakes and fortunes were built on the sweat of others. Augustus Montgomery reigned supreme. At 51, the railroad magnate was known for his impeccable posture, suits imported from Italy, and a rosewood cane that served more as a status symbol than for support. Employees called him the Railroad Baron, behind his back, a title he secretly cherished. The empire he built cut across the United States from coast to coast, connecting cities and transporting wealth that few men could dream of possessing. His fortune was as vast as his capacity for holding a grudge. Separated for over 10 years, Augustus never mentioned the name of Caroline Davies, the only woman who had known his heart before it turned as cold as the steel rails that enriched him. When he rarely referred to her, he called her only the one who abandoned me without explanation. On the rare occasions he smiled, it was only with his lips, never with his eyes, which remained calculating like those of a poker player. That December afternoon, as the heat choked the city, Augustus reviewed documents in his office on the top floor of the Montgomery Tower, from where he could contemplate the gray skyline of the metropolis. His assistant, Richard Carter, entered after knocking discreetly. "Excuse me, Mr. Montgomery, I brought the reports for the expansion into the Midwest, and there's a personal letter that arrived today." Richard hesitated, knowing his boss's temperament well. A letter? Who still sends letters in 1989? It must be some donation request or invitation to a charity event. Leave it on the desk. Augustus didn't even lift his eyes from the documents. "Sir, the envelope, it has a mystic postmark." The magnate froze for an instant. His fingers tightened around the gold pen with enough force to almost break it. Mystic was the only city name capable of destabilizing his self-control. With a brusque gesture, he extended his hand. The envelope was simple, but the paper was of quality. The elegant, feminine handwriting brought back memories he thought buried under years of obsessive work. It was hers. Only Caroline had that peculiar script, with soft curves like the waves that now lapped the shore of the town where she had chosen to live far from him. "You may go," he ordered, his voice harsher than usual. When he was alone, he stared at the envelope for long minutes, as if expecting it to disappear or explode. Finally, with fingers that rarely showed hesitation, he opened it. The letter was short, direct, as Caroline always had been. It informed him that she was selling the small house where she lived in Mystic to move abroad. Before leaving, she wished to resolve pending issues between them. She requested a meeting, a single meeting on neutral ground. The message ended formally, without apparent affection or resentment. "Sincerely, Caroline." Augustus stood up abruptly and walked to the panoramic window. Below, the city buzzed, indifferent to the storm brewing within him. 10 years without seeing her. 10 years building the image of the villain who had abandoned him when he needed support most. And now this letter, breaking the silence he himself had imposed. The idea of refusing crossed his mind. Ignoring her would be the most sensible thing to do, but something in the sobriety of those lines intrigued him. There were no requests, no recriminations, just the acknowledgement that there were unfinished matters. For 3 days, the letter remained on his desk, like a strange object that didn't belong in that universe of numbers, contracts, and power. On the morning of the fourth day, Augustus made his decision. It wouldn't be on neutral ground, as she suggested. If this meeting had to happen, it would be on his terms, on his territory. He called Richard and dictated the reply. Caroline should come to the old Montgomery family estate in the Hudson Valley, New York, where they had spent their first years of marriage, a property Augustus kept intact, despite rarely visiting. He chose a date, 2 weeks from then, and instructed that a limousine be sent to pick her up in Mystic. It was a calculated display of power. She would come to him, to a property laden with memories, transported in a vehicle that symbolized everything he had become after their separation. Caroline's reply arrived quickly, a short telegram: "Accept, will be there, C.D." The formality irritated him. He expected hesitation, perhaps even indignant refusal. The prompt acceptance made him uncomfortable, as if she had anticipated his move on an invisible chessboard. In the following 2 weeks, Augustus plunged into work with even greater intensity. He inaugurated a station in rural Pennsylvania, closed a multi-million-dollar contract for mineral transport, and bought 2 smaller competing companies. Anything to avoid thinking about the scheduled meeting. But at night, alone in his Upper East Side penthouse, as he watched the city lights, memories invaded his mind like unwanted intruders. Caroline at 23, freshly graduated from the Juilliard School, discreetly applauding him after he closed his first big contract. Caroline teaching piano to his partner's daughters, charming everyone with her elegant simplicity. Caroline discussing literature at dinners where businessmen only talked money. Caroline confronting him when he began to transform, when success began to harden his heart. And finally, Caroline walking out the door with only 1 suitcase, without scandal, without tears, just with the silent dignity that had always characterized her. The day before the meeting, Augustus traveled alone to the estate. He dismissed the few employees he still kept there, retaining only the caretaker, Mr. Anthony, with express orders to prepare the house and then retreat to his own residence behind the property. He wanted the place to be exactly as Caroline remembered it. The same antique furniture, the same paintings on the walls, the same books on the shelves, a perfect staging of the past where he would be in control. That night, he drank an expensive whiskey while walking through the silent rooms. In each of them, ghosts of moments lived with Caroline danced in the shadows. The grand piano in the music room, covered by a white sheet like a corpse. The library where they spent rainy afternoons reading in comfortable silence. The master bedroom, with the old dark wood bed where they had loved and dreamed of a future that never came to be. Augustus picked up a framed photo turned face down on a dresser, the only wedding photo he hadn't had the courage to destroy. There they were, young and hopeful. He, still thin, with eyes bright with ambition. She, radiant in a simple dress, with flowers in her hair instead of expensive jewelry. For a moment, he almost didn't recognize the man in the photograph. So distant was he from what he had become. He quickly put the photo away, as if it burned his fingers. Tomorrow, she would be there, in flesh and blood, not just as a painful memory, and he needed to be prepared to show that he had emerged victorious from that abandonment, that he had built an empire while she wasted away teaching piano in a small town. However, as he lay down in the bed they once shared, a question persisted in his mind. If he was the victor, why did he feel as if he were about to face the most important judgment of his life? Caroline Davies watched the landscape change through the limousine window as they left the coast of Mystic behind. The driver, a man of few words, had merely introduced himself as Mr. Montgomery's employee and informed her that the trip would take approximately 5 hours. Typical of Augustus, she thought, to send a luxurious car instead of simply buying a bus ticket. Always the same power play, always the need to impress. At 47, Caroline maintained the upright posture and discreet elegance that had always characterized her. Her hair, once completely black, now showed some silver strands that she didn't bother to hide. Her delicate hands, with long fingers, rested on the small valise in her lap, the same one she had used when she left 10 years ago. A deliberate, symbolic act. For years, Caroline had taught piano and music theory at the small conservatory she had helped found in Mystic. She lived modestly in a rented house near the historic center, attended church on Sundays, and had loyal friends, although few knew of her past. She no longer used the surname Montgomery, although Augustus had never processed the divorce papers, more out of pride than hope of reconciliation. The decision to write to him had not been easy. For years, she had drafted letters she never sent, venting grievances, explaining reasons, revealing secrets, all ended up torn or burned on nights of reflection. But now, with the concrete possibility of leaving the United States, she felt the need to close that chapter of her life. The journey continued along Interstate 95, connecting New York to the Hudson Valley. Caroline contemplated the Appalachian Mountains in the distance, thinking about how this road symbolized her history with Augustus, a connection between different worlds, between metropolitan chaos and provincial tranquility. When they finally crossed the entrance to the St. Clair estate, Caroline's heart involuntarily quickened. The imposing wrought-iron gates, the long driveway lined with ancient oak trees, the grand house on top of the hill, everything remained the same, as if time had frozen in that piece of land. The limousine stopped in front of the main porch. The driver walked around the vehicle to open the door, but Caroline had already stepped out, breathing deeply the air smelling of wet earth and freshly brewed coffee. Small memories assaulted her mind, the sound of songbirds in the morning, rainy afternoons observed from the porch, starry nights when they still believed in the future. The house door opened, and there he was, Augustus Montgomery, more robust than in his youth, carefully trimmed graying hair, impeccable suit even on a rural property. The rosewood cane completed the imposing figure he carefully cultivated. His eyes, however, betrayed his shock at seeing her. Perhaps he expected her to be more aged, more marked by the modest life she had chosen. "Caroline," he said, his deep voice trying to hide any emotion. "Punctual as ever." "Augustus," she replied with a slight nod. "Thank you for receiving me." There was no irony in her voice, only a calculated politeness. He made a vague gesture toward the entrance. "The house is as you left it, almost like a museum." The comment carried a veiled accusation that Caroline chose to ignore. She entered the spacious foyer, where the same paintings of American landscapes adorned the walls. The smell of beeswax and old wood brought a wave of nostalgia she hadn't expected to feel. "Would you like to rest from your journey before dinner?" Augustus asked, maintaining the formality of a host toward any guest. "I prefer to talk now," Caroline replied, turning to face him. "I didn't come all this way to relive memories or feign a cordiality that doesn't exist between us. I came because we need to resolve pending matters." Augustus raised an eyebrow, surprised by her objectivity. The Caroline he had known was softer, more prone to circumventing conflicts. This direct and assertive woman disconcerted him. "As you wish," he replied, leading her to the library. The room, lined with dark wood bookshelves from floor to ceiling, maintained its usual solemn air, rare books that Augustus collected more for status than for a passion for reading. A large desk dominated the center, with two leather armchairs arranged face to face. A bottle of red wine breathed on the table, along with two crystal glasses. "Still drink Cabernet?" he asked, pouring the wine without waiting for an answer. "Occasionally," Caroline replied, accepting the glass but not drinking immediately. "I see you're prospering," she commented, observing the gold watch on his wrist and the platinum cufflinks. "I read about the expansion of Montgomery Railroads in the newspaper, the largest private network in the country, they say." "Business is good," Augustus confirmed with false modesty. "And you? I heard you teach music in Mystic. It must be gratifying." The last word came out laden with condescension. "It's a life I consciously chose," Caroline replied, holding his gaze. "I have few students, but dedicated ones. We hold small concerts at the local church. Nothing to impress New York social circles, but enough to make me happy." A heavy silence settled between them. Caroline took a small sip of wine, tasting the familiar flavor. It was the same brand they drank when they were still a couple, when they still believed they could build a life together. "Why did you call me here, Augustus? We could have met in a neutral place, as I suggested." "This house is as much yours as it is mine," he replied with an ironic smile. "Or it was, until you decided to abandon it. I thought it appropriate that our conversation happen where everything began and where everything ended." Caroline sighed. Emotional manipulation was a tactic she knew well. I didn't abandon the house, Augustus. I abandoned what we were becoming. There's a fundamental difference you never wanted to understand. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the red liquid form a small vortex. And what were we becoming, according to your enlightened perspective? Caroline placed her glass on the table and interlaced her fingers in her lap. You were becoming a man obsessed with control and power, a man who measured the value of everything and everyone by what they could offer him. I was becoming a shadow, an accessory in your life, a trophy wife who was supposed to smile at social events and remain silent when she had her own opinions. The words came out without bitterness, merely as statements of facts long digested. How convenient, Augustus retorted, his voice hardening. I was building an empire, working 16 hours a day to give us a life that many envied, and you felt, what was it again? A shadow. While enjoying the comfort my work provided, I never asked for an empire, Caroline replied serenely. I married a brilliant and passionate engineer, not a magnate obsessed with power. You changed, Augustus, and when I tried to warn you, you accused me of ingratitude and envy, and that's why you fled in the middle of the night, without explanation, without a chance for dialogue. The hurt finally showed in his voice. I left a 3-page letter explaining my reasons. Whether you read it or not, I'll never know. Caroline stood up and walked to one of the bookshelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books. She stopped before a rare edition of The Great Gatsby that she had given him on their first wedding anniversary. I didn't come to discuss the past, Augustus. I came because I'm about to make an important decision in my life, and I thought you deserved to know personally, not through others. Augustus watched her intently, noticing the small gestures that remained familiar even after so long. The way she tilted her head slightly when she was pondering something important, the habit of touching books as if she could absorb their stories through touch. What decision? He finally asked. Caroline sat back down, now with renewed determination in her gaze. I received an invitation to teach at the Vienna Conservatory. An old professor of mine, who now heads the piano department, remembered me when looking for someone to replace a retiring teacher. Vienna? Augustus couldn't hide his surprise. That's unexpected. It was for me too, Caroline admitted. I didn't apply. He watched a video of a recital I gave in Mystic last year. Someone shared it on social media, and he recognized me. Augustus poured himself more wine, trying to process the information. Caroline, who had abandoned a life of luxury by his side, was now invited to one of the most prestigious musical institutions in the world. There was a bitter irony in it. Do you intend to accept? I'm seriously considering it, she replied. I have nothing left to tie me to the United States. My parents passed away years ago. I have no siblings. The few friends I made in Mystic will understand my decision. Augustus felt an unexpected pang, not jealousy nor envy, something deeper and more disconcerting, the realization that she had truly moved on, built a life completely independent of him. Meanwhile, he had spent 10 years nurturing resentment, building an empire that, deep down, he hoped would one day impress her when they met again. When do you plan to leave? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. In 3 weeks. I'm already organizing the move. That's why I needed to speak with you personally. There are pending matters between us that need to be resolved before I leave the country. Augustus felt a chill in his stomach. Pending matters. The official divorce, probably. After so many years, she would finally demand complete freedom from his name. It was her right, he knew, but the prospect of severing this last formal tie between them disturbed him more than he cared to admit. I understand, he said, donning his businessman's mask. We can quickly arrange the divorce papers. My lawyers can... It's not about the divorce, Augustus, Caroline interrupted, her eyes fixed on his. Or not just that. There's something more important you need to know. Something I've kept all these years, for reasons that seemed right at the time, but which I now need to reveal. The solemn tone of her voice made Augustus straighten in his armchair. An alarming thought crossed his mind. Was she ill? Was that the reason for the sudden move to Europe? What are you talking about, Caroline? She took a deep breath like someone preparing to dive into deep, turbulent waters. Augustus, when I left this house 10 years ago, I didn't leave alone. Her eyes didn't waver from his as she completed. I was pregnant. The silence that followed Caroline's words was so dense that it seemed to acquire physical substance, filling every inch of the library with its oppressive presence. Augustus's face, always so controlled, went through a sequence of emotions rarely seen: shock, disbelief, confusion, and finally, a contained rage that made his eyes darken. "Pregnant," he repeated finally, the word coming out like a foreign object from his mouth. "You were pregnant when you left me, and you're telling me this now, 10 years later." Caroline stood firm against the storm brewing before her. "Yes, and the child?" The question came out in gasps, as if each syllable cost enormous effort. "Our son," Caroline replied, deliberately emphasizing the words, "is named Lucas. He's 9.5. He was born in Mystic, where he grew up and goes to school. He's an intelligent, sensitive, and talented boy." Augustus stood up abruptly, his cane hitting the floorboards with force. He walked to the window, turning his back to Caroline as he tried to process the information. A son. He had a 9-year-old son he didn't know. An heir who had grown up away from him, without his name, without his influence. "Why?" The question exploded like thunder in the silent room. "Why did you hide this from me for so long? What right did you have to deprive me of knowing I have a son?" Caroline had expected this reaction. She was not intimidated. "The same right you exercised when you turned our marriage into a relationship of power and control. The right to protect my son from growing up in an environment where he would be just another extension of your ego." Augustus turned, his eyes flashing. "How dare you? Are you implying that I would be a negligent father, that I wouldn't know how to love my own son? I'm stating that, at that time, you had lost the capacity to love anything you couldn't control." Caroline kept her voice calm, but firm. "The man you had become treated people as assets on a balance sheet. You no longer saw value in what couldn't be measured, bought, or sold. That's absurd. A convenient justification for an unforgivable act." Augustus slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses tremble. "You deprived me of 10 years with my son. 10 years I can never get back." "And how many years would you actually have spent with him, Augustus?" Caroline retorted, standing up as well. "How many meetings would you have missed to attend his school performances? How many times would you have put your cell phone aside to listen to his stories? You barely had time for your wife. What place would a son occupy in your busy schedule of unavoidable commitments?" The question hit Augustus like a physical blow. For a moment, the mask of indignation fell, revealing a vulnerability Caroline hadn't seen in many years. He sat back down, running a hand through his graying hair. "What's he like?" he finally asked, his voice lower, almost a whisper. The change in tone surprised Caroline. She hesitated, then took a photograph from her purse and handed it to Augustus. "See for yourself." In the image, a dark-haired boy smiled at the camera, sitting at a piano. He had Augustus's eyes, the same concentrated expression he displayed when working on something important. But the smile, that was Caroline's, open, genuine, unreserved. Augustus held the photograph with hands that trembled imperceptibly. He studied every detail of his son's face as if trying to recover all the lost years in that small rectangle of paper. "He looks like you," Caroline said softly. "He has your quick mind, your prodigious memory, but he's also sensitive to music, to books. He spends hours playing piano or reading. Sometimes I think he inherited the best of both of us." Augustus couldn't tear his eyes from the photograph. A whirlwind of contradictory emotions overwhelmed him: anger at Caroline's omission, sadness for the lost years, fear of the unknown that this son represented, and, surprisingly, a pang of pride at seeing the boy so composed, so intelligent in his gaze. "Does he know who I am?" The question came out laden with ill-disguised anxiety. Caroline hesitated. "He knows he has a father who lives in New York, that he's an important businessman, but he doesn't know details about you or about our separation. I've always answered his questions honestly, but without transferring my hurts or resentments to him. And how do you explain my absence all these years? He must think I'm a monster who abandoned him." The bitterness in Augustus's voice was palpable. "No, I would never allow that," Caroline replied firmly. "I explained that our relationship ended before I knew about the pregnancy, and that I decided to raise our son alone because I thought it was best for everyone. He's a mature child for his age, Augustus. He understands more than many adults. Augustus returned the photograph slowly, as if the act of letting it go was painful. And now, what's your plan? To take him to Vienna, to distance him even further from me, to another continent. The accusation made Caroline's expression harden again. I didn't come here to ask your permission, Augustus. I came out of respect. Because, despite everything, you are his father. You deserve to know about Lucas's existence before we left the country. Generous of you, he replied with cutting irony. 10 years of silence, and now you grant me the honor of knowing I have a son, moments before taking him to the other side of the ocean. Caroline sighed deeply, feeling the fatigue of the journey and the emotional tension weigh on her shoulders. If you want the complete truth, I thought many times about telling you. I even wrote letters I never sent. But whenever I saw your name in the newspapers, whenever I heard stories about your ruthless acquisitions, your aggressive business methods, my doubts returned. What kind of father would you be to Lucas? What influence would you have on him? Augustus poured himself more wine, drinking it in a single gulp. You judged and condemned me without the right to a defense. You unilaterally decided that I don't deserve to know my own son. He paused, his eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the fireplace. And why now, Caroline? Why didn't you take this secret to Vienna without telling me anything? What changed? The question caught Caroline by surprise. For a moment, she seemed vulnerable, insecure. Lucas is growing up. He asks more questions about you. Recently, he found out who you really are. He saw your photo in an economic magazine at the newsstand. He started researching you, about Montgomery railroads. He's a curious boy. She hesitated before continuing. And I realized that I don't have the right to deny him the chance to know his father, if he wishes. Nor do I have the right to deny you the chance to know him. Augustus stared at her, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives. He found only the sincerity that had always characterized Caroline, even in the most difficult moments. When did you plan to introduce me to the boy? Or was that not in your plans? The question contained more hurt than accusation. That depends on you, Caroline replied calmly. And also on Lucas. I can't force him to meet a father who has never been a part of his life, nor can I force you to accept a son you didn't know existed until a few hours ago. A long silence settled in the library. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, and the first stars appeared over the St. Clair estate. Augustus seemed lost in thought, his fingers drumming on the table in a nervous rhythm. I want to meet him, he finally said, his voice firmer. Before you leave for Vienna, it's my right. Caroline nodded slowly. I understand, but I need to prepare Lucas first. Explain the situation calmly. He's sensitive, Augustus. I can't just throw him into such a complex situation without preparing him emotionally. How long would that take? A few days, perhaps a week. I need to return to Mystic tomorrow. I have commitments at the conservatory that I can't cancel. Augustus stood up again, walking to the bookshelf where he remained with his back to Caroline, his shoulders tense under the expensive suit. 16 days, he finally said. You have 16 days to prepare the boy. After that, I will go to Mystic to meet him, with or without your approval. It was the old Augustus speaking, the man accustomed to imposing deadlines and conditions. Caroline could have retorted, could have reminded him that he had no legal authority over Lucas, but something in his posture stopped her. Behind the usual rigidity, there was a vulnerability she hadn't seen since the first years of their marriage. All right, she agreed. In 16 days, you can meet Lucas, but on one condition. Augustus turned, an eyebrow raised in defiance. What condition? That the meeting take place on neutral ground, not here at this farm laden with our memories, nor in your New York office, a place where Lucas feels safe and comfortable. To Caroline's surprise, Augustus didn't argue. He merely nodded briefly. As you wish. You choose the location. Another long silence settled between them. The revelation hung in the air like a living presence, transforming the dynamic between the two. The night advanced outside, and fatigue began to weigh on both of them. It's getting late, Caroline finally said. The journey was long, and tomorrow I need to return early. Augustus seemed to awaken from a trance. Yes, of course. Your room is prepared, the same one as before. Caroline followed him down the dark hallway to the room they once shared. Now, tidied for a guest, it seemed impersonal, despite the familiar furniture. "Dinner will be served in an hour, if you wish to rest before," Augustus said formally, stopping at the door. "Thank you," Caroline replied, equally formal. When he turned to leave, she called him, "Augustus." He stopped, without turning. "I didn't do this to punish you, nor for revenge. I thought I was protecting Lucas, and perhaps you too." Augustus remained motionless for a moment, his hand gripping the doorknob tightly. "Protecting me from what, exactly?" he finally asked, his voice low. "From knowing that there's someone in this world you could love more than yourself, more than your empire. Someone whose happiness would matter more than any contract or acquisition." The words hit Augustus like well-aimed arrows. Without responding, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Caroline sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears held back throughout the conversation to flow freely. She wasn't crying from sadness or regret, but from relief. The secret she had carried for so long was finally revealed, for better or worse. On the other side of the closed door, Augustus remained standing for long minutes, his forehead pressed against the cold wood, his eyes squeezed shut. Inside him, the ruthless businessman fought against the newly discovered father. The railroad magnate who had built an empire faced the young engineer who had once dreamed of building a family. And for the first time in many years, he didn't know which one would win. The 16 days that followed were the longest in Augustus Montgomery's memory. Back in New York City, he plunged into work with feverish intensity, as he always did when he needed to avoid disturbing thoughts. But this time was different. Important meetings seemed trivial. Multi-million-dollar negotiations sounded empty. On sleepless nights in his penthouse, he stared at the photograph of Lucas that Caroline had left with him before leaving. The morning after the meeting at the estate, she had returned to Mystic in the same limousine that had brought her. Their farewell had been brief, formal, laden with unspoken words. Augustus had asked for the photograph almost as an impulsive gesture, and Caroline had handed it over without hesitation. Now, that small rectangle of paper occupied a permanent place in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his heart, though he would never admit the symbolism of that gesture. 3 days after Caroline's departure, Augustus summoned Richard Carter, his trusted assistant for over a decade. "I need you to locate a boy," he said abruptly, interrupting the reading of reports. "A boy?" Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised by the unusual request. "Lucas Davies, 9 years old, residing in Mystic. He attends the local school, probably has piano lessons at the town's conservatory. I want to know everything about him, his routine, his tastes, his activities, but with absolute discretion." Richard hesitated, confused. "If I may ask, sir, why the interest in this specific boy?" Augustus stared at him for a long time, pondering how much he should reveal. Richard was more than an assistant. He was the closest thing he had to a friend. "He's my son," he finally said, his voice lower. "A son I didn't know existed until a few days ago." The shock on Richard's face was evident, but the assistant quickly regained his professional composure. "I understand, sir. I will provide the information with the utmost discretion." In the days that followed, discreet reports arrived at Augustus's desk. Lucas attended Mystic Elementary School, where he excelled in math and literature. He participated in the local church choir. He had piano lessons 3 times a week at the conservatory. On Saturdays, he usually fished with an elderly neighbor at the historic town pier. Each new detail was absorbed with eagerness by Augustus, who tried to build in his mind the complete image of the boy who carried his blood. The most impactful discovery came when Richard brought a recording of a school recital. Lucas, sitting at the piano with impeccable posture, interpreted Chopin with surprising sensitivity for his age. Augustus watched the recording dozens of times, studying every expression of his son, every movement of his hands on the keys, every shy smile at the end of the performance. The day before the deadline, Augustus received a phone call from Caroline. "I spoke with Lucas," she said without preamble. "I explained the situation as best as possible." "And?" Augustus couldn't disguise the anxiety in his voice. "He's confused, as expected. He has many questions, some of which even I don't know how to answer, But he agreed to meet you. Augustus closed his eyes, feeling a relief he didn't know he needed. Where will the meeting be? In the central square of Mystic, near the conservatory. It's a public but quiet place. Lucas feels safe there. I'll be there tomorrow, at noon, Augustus confirmed. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Augustus, Caroline's voice sounded hesitant. Please remember that he's just a boy. Don't expect him to accept you immediately as a father. It will take time. I understand, he replied dryly, though a part of him wanted to protest. Time was precisely what they didn't have with the imminent departure for Vienna. The trip from New York City to Mystic the next day was a test for Augustus's nerves of steel. For the first time in years, he dismissed his driver and drove his own car, a discreet Mercedes sedan, instead of his usual limousine. He wanted to be alone with his thoughts, to prepare for the most important meeting of his life. As he parked at the entrance to the historic town, he felt the weight of history around him. Mystic, with its cobblestone streets and colonial houses, seemed to exist in another time, far from the frantic pace of New York. He walked slowly to the central square, observing the tourists, the local artisans, the church in the background. He dressed with studied simplicity, light linen pants, a blue shirt without a tie, comfortable shoes. He had left his cane in the car, aware that it might intimidate the boy. He spotted Caroline first, sitting on a bench under a leafy tree. Beside her, a dark-haired boy was flipping through a book, concentrated. Lucas seemed even smaller in person than in the photograph, more vulnerable. Augustus felt a lump in his throat. For a moment, he considered turning back, fleeing from that overwhelming responsibility. But then the boy looked up, following Caroline's gaze, and Augustus saw himself reflected in those curious and cautious eyes. Caroline waved discreetly, signaling him to approach. With steps that tried to appear more confident than they really were, Augustus crossed the square. "Good morning," he said, stopping at a respectful distance from the bench. "Punctual as ever," Caroline replied with a slight smile, standing up. "Lucas, this is Augustus Montgomery." The boy closed his book and stood up as well, exhibiting a formal education that contrasted with his youth. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Montgomery," he said, extending his small hand. Augustus felt an unexpected pride as he shook that hand. "The pleasure is mine, Lucas," he replied, surprised by the emotion that made his voice hoarser. "Your mother told me a lot about you, a white lie." Caroline had barely had time to tell him the basics, but the boy seemed to accept the social courtesy. "Shall we sit at that cafe?" Caroline suggested, pointing to a small confectionery on the corner of the square. "Lucas loves their hot cocoa." In the cafe, sitting at a discreet table in the back, the initial silence was awkward. Lucas observed Augustus with contained curiosity, while Augustus tried to find the right words to start a conversation with the son he had just met. "Your mother told me you play the piano," Augustus finally commented. "I saw a video of your school performance. Chopin, wasn't it? Very impressive." Lucas seemed surprised. "You saw it?" He turned to his mother with a questioning look. "I didn't show him any video," Caroline quickly clarified, giving Augustus a warning glance. "How did you get it?" The boy's direct question caught Augustus off guard. Lying would be easy, but something in those eyes so similar to his own demanded honesty. "And I asked my assistant to find information about you," he admitted. "I wanted to get to know you a little before we met." Lucas frowned, processing the information. "So you sent someone to spy on me?" The direct question, without childish filters, was so characteristic of Augustus that he almost smiled. "Not exactly spy, just to get to know. It was wrong of me. I apologize." Caroline seemed as surprised as Lucas by the admission and the apology, rare gestures from Augustus Montgomery. "Why didn't you ever come to see me before?" Lucas asked suddenly, getting straight to the point that bothered him most. Caroline intervened. "Lucas, remember what we talked about? It's a complicated situation that—" "It's okay, Caroline," Augustus interrupted softly. "He deserves direct answers." He turned to his son. "The truth, Lucas, is that I didn't know you existed. Your mother and I separated before she discovered she was pregnant, and she decided not to tell me." Lucas absorbed the information with surprising maturity. "And when did you find out?" 16 days ago, exactly," Augustus replied, keeping his gaze fixed on his son's eyes. "Your mother sought me out to tell me before you left for Vienna." Lucas nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "And now you want to be my father?" The question, so direct and yet so complex, left Augustus momentarily speechless. Caroline seemed ready to intervene again, but he raised his hand discreetly, asking for space. "I am already your father, Lucas. Nothing can change that. But being a father is more than just a biological fact. It's a relationship that is built with time, trust, and presence. I can't expect you to accept me immediately in that role, after 9 years without being a part of your life." The answer seemed to satisfy the boy, who took a thoughtful sip of his hot cocoa. "Do you have other children?" "No," Augustus replied. "You are my only son." Lucas absorbed this information with visible interest. "And what do you do? I know you have a train company. I saw it in a magazine." "Railroads," Augustus corrected gently. "I build and operate railway lines throughout the United States. We transport goods and people from one place to another." "Like those old trains from Western movies?" The genuine interest in the question made Augustus smile. "Some are very modern, but we also have historic trains for tourism. Perhaps one day you'd like to see them." For the first time, a small smile appeared on Lucas's face. "I'd like that. I've never ridden a train." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Lucas talked about his school, his friends, his favorite fish to catch at the pier. Augustus listened attentively, fascinated by every detail, every expression of his son. Caroline observed the interaction with a mixture of apprehension and relief, as if witnessing the late realization of a long-abandoned dream. After almost 2 hours, Lucas began to show signs of emotional fatigue, and Caroline suggested they end the meeting. "Can we see each other again before your trip?" Augustus asked. Trying not to sound too anxious, Lucas looked at his mother, seeking guidance. "If you want to, son," she replied. "The decision is yours." The boy considered for a moment. "Can I think about it? It's a lot for one day." "Of course," Augustus agreed, hiding his disappointment. "Take all the time you need." As they said goodbye at the cafe door, Augustus resisted the urge to hug his son. Instead, he extended his hand formally, as at the beginning of the meeting. To his surprise, Lucas ignored the outstretched hand and, in an impulsive gesture, quickly hugged him. "Thanks for coming to meet me," the boy said, quickly pulling away, as if embarrassed by his own gesture. Augustus, caught off guard by the display of affection, merely nodded, unable to formulate an adequate response. He watched from afar as mother and son walked away down the cobblestone street, Caroline protectively holding Lucas's hand. Only when they disappeared around the corner did Augustus allow his contained emotion to finally surface, manifesting in a single tear that he quickly wiped away. On the way back to New York City, his cell phone rang. It was Richard, with urgent news about an important negotiation. For the first time in his career, Augustus Montgomery replied, "It's not a good time. I'll call you when I get home." He hung up the phone and continued driving, his thoughts fixed not on stock market actions or dollar exchange rates, but on the unexpected hug from a boy who, until a few weeks ago, he hadn't known existed. 3 days after the meeting in Mystic Square, Augustus received a handwritten letter in his office. The simple envelope contained 2 sets of handwriting, Caroline's elegant and fluid script and another smaller, more irregular, but careful one. The latter made his heart quicken unexpectedly. "Dear Mr. Montgomery," Lucas's letter began, "thank you for coming to meet me. It was strange but interesting. I thought a lot after you left and decided I would like us to meet again before the trip to Vienna. Mom said I can choose the place this time. I would like to show you the pier where I fish on Saturdays if you can come. If you prefer, we can meet on Sunday. Sincerely, Lucas Davies." The childlike formality of the letter, the evident attempt to use adult language, moved Augustus in a way no multi-million-dollar contract ever had. Caroline's note was more practical. "Augustus, as you can see, Lucas decided on his own to invite you for another meeting. We will be in Mystic until the end of the month. After that, we will travel to Los Angeles, where we will spend a week resolving documentation before the flight to Vienna. If you wish to meet him again, please let me know in advance. Sincerely, Caroline." Augustus didn't wait even an hour to respond. He dictated a short telegram to Richard. "I will be in Mystic on Saturday. Please cancel all commitments." He then picked up a sheet of personal stationery, something he rarely used, and wrote by hand. "Dear Lucas, thank you very much for your invitation. I will be honored to see your favorite fishing spot on Saturday. I've never been much of a fisherman, so perhaps you can teach me some tricks. I will be in Mystic around 10 a.m. Sincerely, Augustus Montgomery." He reread the letter, hesitated, then added a postscript. "P.S. I will trade my suit for more appropriate fishing attire." He sent the letter by motorcycle courier that same afternoon, with instructions to deliver it directly to Caroline's house in Mystic. The days that followed witnessed a subtle transformation in Augustus's behavior. In important meetings, his mind occasionally wandered. His subordinates noticed that he consulted his watch with unusual frequency, as if counting the hours for something more important than business. On Friday evening, he surprised everyone by leaving the office early, something virtually unprecedented in his career. "I will be in Comunicado until Sunday night," he informed Richard, handing him a folder with detailed instructions. "Only absolute emergencies justify contacting me." On the way to Mystic, Augustus stopped at a sporting goods store. He had never been a man of hobbies or outdoor activities. His only sport was occasional swimming in his condo pool, more by medical recommendation than pleasure. Now, guided by a salesman surprised by his complete ignorance of fishing equipment, he acquired a variety of items he would probably never use: hooks, lines, artificial lures. "Is it for your son?" the salesman asked, mistaking him for a parent buying equipment for a child. "Yes," Augustus replied after a momentary hesitation, "for my son." The words sounded strange in his mouth, but carried a truth he was beginning to accept. He arrived in Mystic the next morning, staying at a discreet inn in the historic center. He dressed as he had promised: light pants, a short-sleeved cotton shirt, a simple hat for sun protection. Even so, his naturally elegant bearing distinguished him from the usual tourists. Caroline and Lucas were waiting for him at the agreed location, near the small square leading to the pier. The boy proudly carried his own fishing equipment, visibly used and well-maintained. "Good morning," Augustus greeted, feeling strangely nervous. "I see you're ready for fishing." Lucas nodded, observing with interest the bag Augustus carried. "Did you buy new equipment, sir?" There was a hint of amusement in the boy's tone, as if he perceived the adult's obvious effort to adapt to the situation. "I confess I've never fished before," Augustus admitted with an awkward smile. "I thought it best to come prepared." "I can lend you my spare equipment," Lucas offered. "It's better to use something that's already proven to work." The pragmatism of the answer surprised Augustus, reminding him so much of himself that he almost laughed. "Wise advice," he agreed. "I always accept recommendations from experts." Caroline watched the interaction with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I'll be at the conservatory if you need anything," she informed them. "Lucas knows the way." The implicit message was clear. She was giving space for father and son to build their own relationship, but she would remain nearby. The walk to the pier was filled with Lucas's enthusiastic explanations about fishing techniques, types of local fish, and stories about his most memorable catches. Augustus listened attentively, absorbing not only the information, but mainly the personality of his son that was revealed in every word. The boy had the same passion for detail that characterized Augustus in his projects, the same meticulous precision in explaining procedures. "This is my favorite spot," Lucas declared as they reached a specific point on the wooden pier. "Mr. Jensen, he's my neighbor, says the fish like the shade the abandoned boat makes in the water." Augustus observed the indicated spot. Indeed, an old beached fishing boat created a shaded area in the clear waters. They sat side by side, their legs dangling over the water. Lucas, with the experience of someone who performed that weekly ritual, prepared 2 fishing rods, handing the simpler one to Augustus. "Oh, this one is easier to handle for beginners," he explained seriously. "Thank you for the consideration," Augustus replied, holding the instrument with exaggerated caution that made Lucas smile. "It's not a confidential document, Mr. Montgomery. It's just a fishing rod." The witty observation surprised Augustus. "You're right," he admitted, visibly relaxing. "And I think you can call me Augustus, or..." He hesitated, unsure if he should proceed. The boy waited, his curious eyes fixed on him. "Or Dad, if one day you feel comfortable with that." Lucas didn't answer immediately, casting his line into the water with the precision of a regular practitioner. "Maybe one day," he finally said, without looking at Augustus. "I'm still getting used to the idea of having a dad." The childlike frankness was disconcerting and, at the same time, refreshing for someone accustomed to the nuances and subterfuges of the corporate world. "That's fair," Augustus agreed, trying without much success to imitate Lucas's casting motion. The boy corrected his technique with surprising patience. The following hours passed in a peace Augustus hadn't experienced in years. The fishing itself proved less important than the conversation that flowed between them. Hesitant at first, more natural as time went on. Lucas talked about his school friends, his favorite books, his passion for the piano that had begun at 5 years old. "Do you plan to continue studying music in Vienna?" Augustus asked, trying to keep his tone casual despite the weight of the question. Lucas shrugged. "Mom says the conservatory there is one of the best in the world, but..." He hesitated, as if pondering whether he should share a secret. "But I'm not sure I want to go." Augustus kept his gaze fixed on the water, fearful that any more enthusiastic reaction might influence the boy. "Don't you want to leave your friends?" he asked carefully. "That too," Lucas admitted. "But it's more than that. I've never left the United States. I don't speak German. And now..." He left the sentence incomplete, but the meaning was clear. "And now you've discovered you have a father here," Augustus completed softly. Lucas nodded, his eyes still fixed on the fishing line. "Mom says we can come back to visit, and that there are phones and letters." "Certainly," Augustus agreed, "but I understand your hesitation. It's a big change." A tug on Lucas's line interrupted the conversation. With impressive skill for his age, the boy handled the rod, bringing in a struggling silver fish. "A striped bass," he exclaimed with pride. "It's the first one this size I've caught." Augustus watched, admiring, as his son carefully removed the hook and returned the fish to the water. "Aren't you taking it home?" he asked, surprised. "Today is just for fun," Lucas explained. "Mr. Jensen says a good fisherman knows when it's time to fish for food and when it's time to fish just for the joy of fishing." There was a simple wisdom in those words that touched Augustus deeply. He, who had always measured success in terms of acquisitions and tangible results, had never considered the intrinsic value of the experience for experience's sake. At noon, they shared a lunch Lucas had brought, simple sandwiches and orange juice in a thermos. Augustus, accustomed to refined restaurants and expensive wines, discovered an unexpected pleasure in the simplicity of that meal. "Do you always come fishing here on Saturdays?" he asked, already knowing the answer thanks to Richard's reports, but wanting to hear it from Lucas himself. "Almost always," the boy confirmed, "except when it rains or when I have piano performances." There was a thoughtful pause before he added, "In Vienna, I probably won't have anywhere to fish." "Vienna is on the banks of the Danube River," Augustus informed him. "I'm sure there are excellent fishing spots there too." Even as he offered this comfort, he felt an internal contradiction. Part of him wanted to reassure his son about the imminent move. Another, more selfish part of Eto'o wanted to feed his doubts, keep him in the United States, close to him. On the way back from the pier, they found Caroline waiting at the small restaurant near the square. Her expression upon seeing them together, conversing with apparent naturalness, mingled relief and a hint of nostalgia. "How was the fishing?" she asked, when they sat at the table she had reserved. "Lucas caught a huge striped bass," Augustus reported with paternal pride that surprised him, and he released it back into the water, showing admirable environmental awareness. The praise made Lucas blush with satisfaction. "And you? Did you catch any?" Caroline asked Augustus, with a smile that suggested she already knew the answer. "Apparently, mystic fish are prejudiced against New York executives," he replied with a rare self-deprecating humor. They didn't bite my bait once." Lunch proceeded in a pleasant, almost familiar atmosphere, though with occasional moments of tension when the conversation touched, however indirectly, on the near future. Caroline mentioned practical details about the move. Lucas asked about the apartment they would have in Vienna, and Augustus felt simultaneously excluded from those plans and guilty for wishing they would fail. As they said goodbye at the restaurant door, Augustus felt the urgency of time slipping away. Only 2 weeks remained before Caroline and Lucas's departure. "Can we see each other again before your trip?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Caroline and Lucas exchanged glances, a silent communication that evidenced the deep connection between mother and son. "Actually," Caroline replied, "we were thinking of spending a few days in Los Angeles before embarking. Perhaps you could visit us there." The suggestion surprised Augustus. It was the first time Caroline had taken the initiative to propose a meeting. "That would be great," he agreed immediately. "I have an apartment in Beverly Hills that I rarely use. You could stay there if you like." He saw the immediate discomfort on Caroline's face and quickly added, "I wouldn't be present, of course. It's just a practical offer of accommodation." "Thank you, but we already have hotel reservations," she replied politely. "However, we would appreciate your company for a tour of the city. Lucas has never been to the Getty Center." "It would be an honor to be your guide," Augustus agreed, addressing the boy. "We can explore the main sites before your big European adventure." Back in New York City on Sunday night, Augustus found his apartment strangely empty and silent. He had always appreciated solitude as a necessary luxury after days of meetings and forced interactions. Now, for the first time, solitude weighed like an absence, not a choice. On Monday, he surprised Richard by requesting a change in his schedule for the following week. "I need to be in Los Angeles from Wednesday to Friday," he informed him. "Transfer any meetings that cannot be postponed to virtual format." Faced with his assistant's curious gaze, he merely added, "Personal matters." That night, before going to sleep, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He wrote a letter by hand, not to Lucas this time, but to Caroline. "Our son is extraordinary," the letter began. "I see in Lucas not only our physical traits, but qualities of character I've always admired in you. Integrity, sensitivity, the ability to see value beyond appearances. You've done an admirable job raising him alone, and I must acknowledge that perhaps you made the right decision in keeping him away from the man I was 10 years ago." He paused, his pen hesitating over the paper. He was about to write something he had never admitted, not even to himself. "I've thought a lot about what you said at the estate, that perhaps you were protecting me from knowing there was someone I could love more than myself, more than my empire. You were right. The prospect of Lucas leaving for Vienna made me realize how empty these years of material conquests have been. I'm not asking you to give up your plans for my sake. I'm simply acknowledging a truth you saw long before me." He sealed the envelope, unsure if he would have the courage to send it. For now, he kept it in the drawer of his bedside table, along with Lucas's photograph that he now looked at every night before sleeping. The Getty Center rose majestically against the blue Los Angeles sky that Wednesday morning. Augustus, Caroline, and Lucas waited in line for the tram, tourists among tourists, a family that to outside eyes might seem common. But the occasional glances exchanged between the adults, the hesitation in the boy's behavior, revealed the invisible complexity of that newly formed relationship. "Have you ever imagined building a railway to the top of this place?" Lucas asked Augustus, his eyes shining with the enthusiasm typical of his 9 years. Since the meeting at the pier, the boy had shown growing interest in the trains and railroads that made up Augustus's empire. "It would be a fascinating engineering challenge," Augustus replied, surprised by the perceptiveness of the question. "The incline would require a rack and pinion system, like some railways in Switzerland, but the environmental impact would probably make the project unfeasible." Lucas nodded, absorbing the technical explanation with seriousness. "Perhaps it's better to leave some mountains without tracks," he concluded, demonstrating a wisdom that made Augustus smile. The visit to the Getty Center was followed by a trip to see the Hollywood sign and later lunch at the traditional Musso and Frank grill. With each new shared experience, the barriers between them seemed to diminish. Lucas, initially cautious, now asked Augustus direct questions about his childhood, his studies, how he decided to work with railroads. Caroline observed the interaction with a mixture of relief and nostalgia, as if witnessing the late realization of a long-abandoned dream. In the late afternoon, as they walked along Santa Monica Pier and beach, Lucas ran ahead to watch a group of young people playing beach volleyball. Taking advantage of the moment alone, Augustus discreetly handed Caroline the envelope he carried in his inside jacket pocket, the letter he had written days earlier. "You don't have to read it now," he said quickly. "Just when you have a moment alone." Caroline accepted the envelope with a questioning expression, but did not open it. She put it in her purse carefully, like someone preserving something precious. "Augustus," she began, hesitantly, "these days have been important for Lucas, and I must admit, for me too. For me, they've been transformative," he confessed, the words coming out with more emotion than he intended. "I never imagined that meeting a son I didn't know existed could redefine everything I thought I knew about myself." That night, back in his Beverly Hills apartment, Augustus couldn't sleep. The next morning, a phone call from Richard brought him back to the reality of business. An unexpected crisis threatened an important contract with the federal government. His presence was urgently requested in Washington, D.C. At any other time in his career, Augustus would have left immediately, putting any personal commitment aside. But now the prospect of canceling the planned outing for that day with Lucas and Caroline seemed unthinkable. "Arrange a video conference," he instructed Richard. "I'll be available online at 2 in the afternoon, but I cannot leave Los Angeles today." "But sir," the assistant protested, "the minister insisted on an in-person meeting. Billions are at stake." "And I insist we can resolve this remotely," Augustus retorted with a firmness that allowed no discussion. "If the minister cannot adapt, we will reschedule for Monday." He hung up the phone, aware that he had just done something unprecedented in his career, prioritizing a family commitment over a potentially billion-dollar deal. At the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, where he met Caroline and Lucas as planned, nothing in his behavior betrayed the professional conflict he had left behind. He dedicated himself entirely to explaining exotic plant species to his son, drawing on knowledge acquired during international travels. Lucas absorbed every piece of information with enthusiasm, making surprising connections and observations that revealed a naturally curious mind. "He's so much like you," Caroline commented, at a moment when Lucas had gone ahead to examine a giant water lily, the same thirst for knowledge, the same capacity for concentration. "But he has your sensitivity," Augustus replied, "your perception of what truly matters." A moment of silent understanding passed between them, the realization that, despite all the mistakes and separations, they had created something extraordinary together. At 2 in the afternoon, Augustus excused himself for half an hour to participate in his video conference. Sitting on a discreet bench in the Botanical Gardens, using the laptop he had brought in his backpack, he conducted a complex negotiation with the Secretary of Transportation. Across the path, Lucas and Caroline watched with curiosity that demonstration of the other Augustus, the ruthless executive, the skillful negotiator who had made a fortune on the railroads of the United States. When he returned to the tour, Augustus seemed slightly preoccupied. "Something wrong?" Caroline asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing important," he replied, forcing a smile. Just a contract I'll probably lose to the competition." "Why?" Lucas asked, always direct. "Because I would need to be in Washington, D.C. right now to close it personally, and I preferred to be here with you two," Augustus explained with sincerity. The impact of this admission did not go unnoticed by Caroline. She had known Augustus when his career was his only priority, when no personal commitment ever superseded business. This change, more than any words or promises, evidenced a profound transformation. That night, after dropping Lucas and Caroline at their hotel, Augustus received an unexpected message on his cell phone. It was a photo sent by Caroline, Lucas asleep, hugging a small toy train that Augustus had given him as a gift. The message simply said, "He won't let go of your gift. I read him a book about the history of American railroads until he fell asleep." Something warmed Augustus's chest when he saw that image. In his luxurious Beverly Hills apartment, sitting on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the powerful businessman allowed himself, for the first time in decades, to cry openly. The next morning, the last day before his scheduled departure for New York City, Augustus surprised Caroline and Lucas with an unexpected proposal. "I'd like to take you to a special place," he said as he met them for breakfast. "It's a bit far from here, but I promise it will be worth it." Intrigued, mother and son followed him to the hotel parking lot, where a limousine awaited them. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "It's a surprise," Augustus replied with an enigmatic smile. The journey lasted almost 2 hours, leaving Los Angeles towards the interior. When the car finally stopped, they were in front of a restored old railway station in a small historic town. "Welcome to the Imperial Station of Jamestown," Augustus announced, helping them out of the vehicle. "The first railway section built by my grandfather, Treach and Gerald Montgomery, in 1932. The station was a beautiful example of Art Deco architecture, meticulously preserved. Inside, a small museum told the history of American railroads, with special emphasis on the Montgomery family's contribution." Lucas walked through the exhibits with wide eyes, fascinated. "Your great-grandfather was a pioneer," Augustus explained, pointing to a sepia photograph showing an austere man beside an old locomotive. "He started as a railroad engineer and dreamed of an America connected by rails from coast to coast." Caroline watched the interaction between father and son with a lump in her throat. There was something profoundly moving in the way Augustus shared his family history with Lucas, as if weaving an invisible thread connecting the past to the future. After visiting the museum, Augustus led them outside, where an even greater surprise awaited: a restored steam locomotive, gleaming under the morning sun with a single passenger car attached. "This is the North Star, my father's favorite locomotive," Augustus explained, "and I personally restored it 5 years ago as a side project to my business. Very few people have had the privilege of riding it since then." Lucas's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Are we going to ride it?" he asked, barely containing his enthusiasm. "For a special section I reserved just for us," Augustus confirmed. "It's a short but unforgettable journey." The ride on the historic locomotive was indeed magical. The single car had been restored with all the luxury of the golden age of railroads: leather armchairs, noble wood tables, polished bronze details. As the train moved slowly along the old tracks, crossing bucolic landscapes, Augustus told stories about the construction of that railway, the difficulties faced, the victories achieved. Lucas listened to everything with absolute attention, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated understanding beyond his age. Caroline, sitting a little distance away, observed the scene with a mixture of contradictory emotions. There was an undeniable beauty in that late meeting between father and son, in that connection that had blossomed against all odds. But there was also the reality of the imminent departure for Vienna, of plans already made, of commitments undertaken. When the train finally returned to the station, after a lunch served on board, the sun was already beginning to set on the horizon. On the way back to Los Angeles, Lucas fell asleep in the limousine seat, his head resting on Caroline's shoulder. "He's exhausted but happy," she commented in a low voice. "It was a perfect day, Augustus. Thank you for sharing that with him, with you both," he gently corrected. There was a moment of silence laden with unexpressed meanings before Augustus finally gathered the courage for the question that tormented him. "Yet do you really have to go?" The words came out almost as a whisper. Caroline looked at her sleeping son, then at Augustus. "It's a unique opportunity for me, Augustus, and for Lucas too. Vienna is the world center of classical music." "I know that," he replied, running a hand through his graying hair in a gesture of contained frustration. "And I don't have the right to ask you to give up your dreams. It's just that—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's just that I just found him, found you both, and I'm already losing you again." The vulnerability in the voice of that habitually controlled man moved Caroline deeply. "You're not losing us," she said softly. "We'll be a phone call away, and there are planes, Augustus. You can visit us in Vienna, and we can come back for holidays. It's not the same," he argued. "Lucas is at a crucial age. He needs a present father, not occasional visits." Caroline studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. "Did you read my letter?" Augustus finally asked. She nodded. "I read it last night after you left us at the hotel, and I was touched," she admitted. "You seem sincere in your desire to be a part of Lucas's life. But, Augustus, building a father-son relationship requires more than good intentions. It requires commitment, constant presence, the ability to put his needs above your own. I'm willing to do that, he affirmed with conviction. I've already started reorganizing my professional life, delegating responsibilities, reducing travel. I'm even considering opening a company branch in Los Angeles to be closer to you both when you return from Vienna. Caroline smiled with a touch of irony, always the strategist, planning every move. But there was affection in her voice, not criticism. You really have changed, haven't you? Or perhaps I'm just rediscovering who I was before success transformed me, Augustus reflected. The man you once fell in love with. The comment hovered between them like an unformulated question. Caroline looked away, focusing on the landscape passing by the limousine window. I'm not asking us to go back to what we were, Augustus quickly clarified. I know a lot of water has passed under that bridge. I just want the chance to be a father to Lucas, and perhaps in time rebuild some kind of friendship with you. When they arrived at the hotel, Lucas woke up drowsy. Augustus accompanied him to the room, helping him get ready for bed while Caroline took a quick shower. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he watched his son fight sleep to ask one more question about trains. Sleep now, he said gently. Tomorrow we'll talk more. Will you be here tomorrow? Lucas asked, his voice already thick with sleep. I will, Augustus promised, and many other days after that. When Lucas finally fell asleep, Augustus found Caroline in the small living area of the suite. She held an envelope in her hands, a different letter from the one he had given her. Perhaps we should postpone the trip, she said without preamble. How? Augustus couldn't hide his surprise. I've been thinking since I read your letter, and watching you with Lucas today, perhaps it's too hasty to take him to another continent just when he's building a relationship with his father. But the conservatory, your career, the invitation doesn't have an expiration date, Caroline explained. I spoke with my old professor yesterday. He understands the situation and is willing to wait until next semester, if we decide to postpone. The hope that appeared on Augustus's face was almost painful to witness. And what about Lucas? He asked, cautious. He was excited about the trip. Actually, he's been showing more and more hesitation, Caroline admitted, especially since he met you. Last night, while I was reading your letter, he asked me if we couldn't stay in the United States longer. A powerful emotion overcame Augustus, something between relief and gratitude. What does that mean exactly? He asked, fearing to misunderstand. It means we can stay in Los Angeles for a few more months, Caroline replied. Get to know this new dynamic between the three of us better. Give Lucas time to build a solid relationship with you before we consider such a drastic move. And after that, Augustus pressed, what happens after those months? Caroline smiled, a smile that mingled determination and a new openness he hadn't seen in years. After that, we'll decide together, as Lucas's parents, whether the decision is to go to Vienna, stay in the United States, or find some intermediate path. Augustus inhaled deeply, assimilating the magnitude of that concession. Thank you, he said simply, the words inadequate to express the whirlwind of emotions he felt. I'm not doing this for you, Caroline clarified. I'm doing it for Lucas, and perhaps a little for myself too, because I realize that some journeys cannot be rushed. Augustus nodded, understanding what she didn't explicitly say, that there was a long road ahead, that trust would need to be rebuilt, that nothing was guaranteed beyond the opportunity to try. It's more than I deserve, he admitted, but I promise not to waste this chance. That night, upon returning to his apartment, Augustus did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He opened a bottle of the wine he and Caroline used to share in the early years of their marriage. Alone on the balcony, contemplating the city lights, he raised his glass in a silent toast to the uncertain future unfolding. A future where, for the first time in many years, the tracks of his life no longer led only toward power and success, but curved back toward what truly mattered. The next morning, a sunny Sunday, Augustus found Caroline and Lucas having breakfast on the hotel balcony. There was a lightness in the air, as if an important decision had already been communicated and accepted. Good morning, he greeted, sitting at the table. Mum told me we're staying in Los Angeles for now, Lucas announced without preamble, his eyes shining with anticipation. and that you're going to help us find an apartment and a school for me. If you allow me, Augustus confirmed, looking at Caroline for approval. She nodded with a small smile. Actually, Lucas continued, I had an idea yesterday when we were on the train. Augustus and Caroline exchanged intrigued glances. What idea? He asked. You said you restored that locomotive as a side project to your business, the boy explained. I thought we could have a project too, all three of us. What kind of project? Caroline asked, curious. We could restore another steam locomotive together, Lucas suggested, his enthusiasm growing in his voice. You know the technical part. Mum could take care of the aesthetic and historical part, and I could learn from both of you. It would be our family project. The word family, coming so naturally from his son's lips, hit Augustus and Caroline with equal intensity. For a moment, neither of them could respond, too moved by the simplicity of the proposal. I think that's a brilliant idea, Augustus finally managed to say, his voice slightly choked. In fact, I have an old steam locomotive stored in a shed in Jamestown that would be perfect for this project. And I could research the original decoration, the history of that model, Caroline added, entering into the spirit of the idea. We could work on it on weekends, Lucas suggested, already planning. And when it's ready, we can take a special trip, just the three of us. As the boy elaborated his plan with growing enthusiasm, Augustus and Caroline exchanged a look that contained a whole universe of possibilities. It wasn't a promise of romantic reconciliation, nor a guarantee that all the wounds of the past were healed. It was something perhaps more valuable, the mutual recognition that through the sun they shared, they had found a new starting point. Like tracks that separate only to meet again further down the line, their lives had taken different paths only to converge again, transformed by the journey, but still capable of reconnecting. And on that sunny morning in Los Angeles, as Lucas talked animatedly about locomotives and journeys, Augustus Montgomery finally understood what Caroline had tried to teach him so many years before, that true wealth was not in the empires we build, but in the hearts we touch along the way. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Augustus, Caroline, and Lucas has touched your hearts. To follow this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this narrative about second chances and rediscoveries, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of family ties and the opportunities life offers us when we least expect them. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced a surprising reconnection in your lives. We look forward to reading your experiences.